The campaign music is making one last appearance this year because the 2018 midterms are officially done. Election season ended Tuesday night with Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith winning Mississippi's Senate seat. She defeated Democrat Mike Espy in a runoff election, but not by an impressive margin. And she had some help in the final stretch of her campaign. The president stumped for her earlier this week at two separate events. His presence raised questions about why his visits were necessary, since Mississippi has been a reliably red state for years. Washington Post's David Weigel recently took a look at what Tuesday's race means for 2020 in the latest installment of his newsletter, The Trailer. And David Weigel joins me now. He's a national reporter covering politics for the Washington Post. David, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. You write that both parties watched Mississippi for lessons that could inform their strategies for the next few years. So what is each side taking with them into 2020 after Tuesday?
Well, starting with Republicans, this hardened their resolve in terms of tying the party to the president, counting on the president's support to galvanize voters who tended to vote Republican in presidential elections, but maybe slacked off in midterms, slacked off in special elections. Now, Cindy Hyde-Smith did worse than the president did in Mississippi, including in the counties that he visited before the election, in Biloxi and in Tupelo. But the Democrats were counting on, or maybe not counting, expecting Republican turnout to dip a little bit from the first round in November 6th, and it didn't. And so Republicans looking at that, they have not been very reflective about the party's fortune since the midterm, and I think this encouraged them to keep betting on the president's coalition to win, this white rural coalition. From the Democrats' perspective, they got closer than they would have thought maybe two months ago. They lost by a little bit less than 8 points, and they turned out more voters than they turned out in the Mississippi's last couple races for governor. They turned out more voters than they'd had for a Senate race since 1988. And they did so with this very aggressive black voter turnout campaign and appeals to voters in the suburbs. Mississippi is not a state where that gets you a majority. It is enough for a majority in a place like Georgia, a place like North Carolina. And you see where I'm getting. Those are more relevant in terms of winning the presidency and winning the Senate in 2018.
So then was this Mississippi race far less about the candidates and much more about their parties?
It ended up being that way. Now, Mike Espy had more of a reputation among black Mississippians than I think was appreciated outside the state. I was in the state for about half a week over the weekend up to the election. He was the first black congressman elected in Mississippi, period, and had a resilient support that he built on. He did better than Democrats have been able to do, even than Barack Obama was able to do in parts of that state. And but he was flawed. He had quit politics because of a bribery scandal. He beat the charges, but it basically ended his political career in the 90s, and that was the Republican campaign against him. Republicans spent about $4.5 million on ads. Most of them reminded people why Mike Espy was out of politics. At the same time, Republicans got the candidate they wanted in a very literal sense. They were worried about Chris McDaniel, who had run for this seat in 2014, becoming the nominee. Polling said he would be tied with Espy and then run off to. And polling suggested that Hyde-Smith would win easily. She's now the first elected female senator in Mississippi of either party. She had a fairly modest reputation as the agriculture commissioner, former Democrat, and she turned out to be kind of a stumbling candidate, but they had somebody running as a vector for the president. Well, one thing I pointed out, and my colleague Visor pointed out too, the Republicans' final mail sent to their voters, final targeting, did not mention her. They just said, please vote in the Senate election today. And again, Republicans, having had a pretty bad midterm election, have not looked back and said, we need to distance ourselves from the president, we need to tweak something. They basically said, no, we need to just run on the president's popularity and record with our voters, and that's it.
Yeah, they doubled down on that for sure. Now, you know, David, you write that one of the lessons learned was, quote, Republicans are still casting for a boogeyman. What do you mean by that, and have they found one?
Well, they're still casting for it because they haven't. The most popular negative figure in Republican ads in Mississippi was Hillary Clinton, who you didn't miss anything. She's still not running for president. She's not been on any ballot for 2 years and for 3 weeks now. And she never worked with Mike Espy. He worked for her husband's administration. She didn't do anything for his campaign, but Republicans were focused on Hillary Clinton, a little bit on Chuck Schumer. They have not found somebody who alienates swing voters, or even gets their voters as excited as Hillary did as a presidential candidate, as Barack Obama did in 2010, the years like that. Now, eventually, Democrats will have a nominee, and they'll try to turn that person into an object of fear and negative motivation. But David, they don't have one.
And David, do you feel that Republicans sense that they need that kind of a negative character to focus energy on? They can't run a positive campaign?
Well, they had the opportunity. They haven't really done it. Even the positive ads in Mississippi were kind of presenting the country as under threat, that there was a migrant crisis on the border. And to watch them, you would have thought Donald Trump was still running for president, that someone else was controlling the country, things were a mess, and we need to fix it. They have not, even in the midterms, groups that said they were going to run ads about the economy, about the tax cuts, they did a little bit of that, but it was more motivating people against the Democrats. It was really Democrats who ran the more positive campaign. And again, it was a little bit of things could be better, which is a negative, but they would spell out the things they were going to do on health care, on infrastructure, et cetera.
I wonder if there's something to the psychology of these voters, like the psychology of the Democrats are they want to be positive, and the psychology of the Republicans is they need something to rail against, perhaps.
Well, I think that's true, but it's also look. One of the last races I covered in the midterms was the race for New Jersey Senate seat. What you had there was two unpopular candidates: Bob Menendez, who won by about 10 points, who had been scandalized; a Republican, Bob Hugin, who was new to politics but became pretty unpopular pretty fast. And you had lots of money being spent, which is people just trashing each other with very little positive about what they could do. You're going to have in 2020, unless something dramatic changes.
Right.
We always have to add that caveat, but we have a president. We know how he behaves. We know that his behavior and decisions have been unpopular. How do you win re-election as somebody with 40% support? You have to go negative. So that's why I thought what we saw in Mississippi was a preview.
Right, and certainly President Trump has become the boogeyman for Democrats, for sure. He's a good motivator on that side. Now, I just want to get to health care. You mentioned how health care became one of the Democrats' main talking points this midterm season. As they prepare to take over the House, what are Democrats doing to fulfill those campaign promises, especially on pre-existing conditions?
Well, that's an interesting and complicated issue because it's so uncomplicated. What Republicans warned people was that if Republicans retained Congress, all of it, House and Senate, they would take another run at repealing the ACA, which Republicans said they were going to do. Democrats, by having won the House, there's 30-odd days left of this lame duck, but if Republicans don't act on that, Democrats have already stopped any changes to the pre-existing conditions provisions. There will be no health care bill undermining the ACA passed in the House. There will be an attempt to shore it up, possibly with a new arrangement in the Senate. What Democrats might do substantively is join the defense in the lawsuit Republican attorneys general have filed to repeal the ACA based on the mandate being zeroed out. Or what they could do, and you've heard less discussion about this, is pass a budget that restores the mandate, would negate that lawsuit. The thinking is that the lawsuit's frivolous, but frivolous lawsuits have gotten pretty far before. But they're basically going to remain in defense of the law, and they don't need to pass anything new. The discussion about what the party would do with power it's a bit of a Back to the Future thing, because they're not going to have the votes to pass anything unless 2 years from now they win the presidency and maybe a majority in the Senate.
Right.
So the whole how will they act on the promise? I mean, it's similar to what Republicans did in 2010. They said if elected, we're going to stop what Obama's doing. They stopped it, and that wasn't a positive agenda. It was enough for them to win an election. It was something that their voters appreciated once in power.
Right.
There was no cap and trade bill. There was no additional fix to Obamacare. That's not seen as a positive accomplishment or a bill they could pass, but that's often what governing is stopping something from happening.
All right, David, we also stumbled upon a fun video of you playing Tetris during an interview with Democratic Congressman and 2020 hopeful John Delaney. What was the headline from your conversation here?
It's a good question, because he's been so out front on running for president, unlike some people who've been coy about whether they will, that he was talking about things he stood for that haven't got a lot of coverage. But no, I think him continuing to argue that he's going to have a lane in this race as a businessman who turned congressman that no one else is going to have. He was dismissive of people like Mike Bloomberg, other people with these records, without going super negative. And he also on health care, which is, I think, going to be a defining issue, like I was saying, for Democrats in the primaries, what are we going to do? He carved out something that was not Medicare for all, that I think is going to be part of this mix, this Democratic debate. How much does their electorate want a president who promises them the moon like Donald Trump did, or like Bernie Sanders did? How much are they going to want something achievable? So I think it was a good table setter for the primary we're going to have. If there was news, is that he was open to doing more video game shows. So I hope that trend continues.
David Weigel of Washington Post. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.